All right, good evening, folks. Welcome to Monthly on Mondays. This is our event for October 14th, starting a lab and mentoring students with myself and Karina Cramer in Biosci and Peter Donovan in Biosci and School of Medicine. So we're going to take turns here presenting. Just a quick overview. There will certainly be a question and answer session at the end here and several slides to share. Everything we post we'll share with you at the end of the session. We can distribute the slides, and the recording of this event will be hosted on the School of Medicine's academic personnel website. So I'm going to give a brief overview about getting started at UCI and starting a lab. Then Karina Cramer is going to speak about communications and aligning expectations. And Peter Donovan is going to talk about mentorship of postdocs and graduate students. All right, so pretend that we're sitting across a table from each other. Thank you. Congratulations for getting hired at UCI, and some tips and tricks for getting started establishing your own lab. So really the thing to think about is that you were hired for a reason, and that reason is probably contained in your chalk talk. That's what the department reviewed and thought what your plans are makes sense. And so you really should stick to what you posted, what you put in your chalk talk, and that should really make part of your 5-year, 6-year plan. So you definitely want to have a plan of how to get to tenure, and certainly talk to your chair, myself, other folks in academic personnel, and at various committees you're going to learn about briefly. Know what your step and series are. We'll go over that very briefly tonight. Keep track of your merit and promotion schedule. Then meet with your chair and your mentors regularly, get on their schedule well in advance, and think of it as your job to get on their schedule, not their job to make sure they've checked in with you. Hopefully it's working both ways, but make sure that you're getting the mentorship that you need. Another thing we'll be going over is establishing lab policies and procedures. Do you have a lab policy? What is your policy on vacations, presenting at conferences? Do you have to be on an abstract where the lab won't fund someone to go? You should have those planned out and the answers to those questions before people start asking. And then finally, you need to get a lot of paperwork submitted, getting your IRB, IACUC proposals, your IBC protocols in, and making sure, because you're in charge, getting your lab manager, your staff, and students added to all of your protocols so that everything is legal and appropriate. So one of the first things of advice I give to folks, and one of the great things about the UC system, is that we have a very clear system of expectations and guidelines. And so depending on what series you've been hired in, there are sections of the academic personnel manual. I don't recommend, unless you have insomnia, that you read the entire academic personnel manual, but you certainly want to go to APM 220, appointments and promotions for the inline series, if you're inline faculty. If you're ClinX, you want to go to APM 275, and in residence APM 270. So those documents actually outline all of the expectations and the timeline and the rules and regulations that pertain to your series. And they're very well laid out, and they're obviously very closely followed by your department and academic personnel. Next, along that same lines, you should know what step you're at and what the steps are for going to mid-career appraisals and for getting a tenure review. So there is a published document, and again, you'll see these slides later, about a 2-year process of merits. As you go down the ladder, you're getting merits to higher and higher steps in your series. You typically get a mid-career appraisal when you're to step 3, and then you go up for promotion to associate professor when you're at a step 4, going to an associate professor step 1. So you should know those steps, and if you're lucky, now this is just a mock copy, but if you're lucky, your department has shared a document with you, basically called a promotions clock, of each year you're on the clock. You have 8 years there's an 8-year limit, and you should have very clear guidelines on when your appointment date was, what step you're at, and when your MCA comes up, when you're not going up for merit, and when you're going up for promotion. So if you have any questions about that, talk to your CAO or your department chair, or contact myself. happy to go over that with you. Now, in line with what are the other resources available to you, there are a lot of resources available. So this, again, will be a slide available to you, but you are encouraged to attend a National Center for Faculty Development faculty success program. This is done online. There is a cost to it, but typically your dean, department chair, and the Office of Inclusive Excellence will split the costs with you, expecting you to spend some of your startup funds on this as well to invest in yourself. You should make sure you're attending department seminars, graduate presentations, and thesis defenses in your program. Participate, ask questions, make sure you're involved, and make sure your colleagues are getting to know you. You should attend an Academic Resources Advisory Committee, or it's called ARAC, in your second or third year. You can attend as an observer. There's a similar committee for clinical faculty as well. And you get to see what a tenure and merit file review looks like and ask questions at the end so that you know where you stand in relations to merits and promotions. UC Irvine offers a NIH boot camp every 10 months or it's a 10-month program. It's offered yearly. This helps you write for an R01, helps you plan your budgets, get information and data from people, share your ideas, and shop around your ideas. So you're really encouraged to take what you put in your chalk talk and meet with colleagues that are doing similar work and go over your ideas for R01s and various grants from various agencies. Get feedback early so that you are more successful when you're submitting your grants. When you get those critiques back, meet with your mentors and advisory committees and get feedback and plan how you're going to address those criticisms. And another piece of advice is that you start a filing system to track your research, teaching, and service, and your inclusive excellence activities. So you really want a live spreadsheet that you have maybe on Google Docs, where you're tracking your students mentored, what advisement committees or advancement committees, thesis committees you've been on, start dates and end dates. Did any of your students or mentees win awards? You're tracking all of this in a spreadsheet so that later you can put it in an AP10 and you have all the dates and facts and figures correct. Oops. You also want to hopefully establish mentorship compacts, and this, as Peter or Karina might speak to later, these are good ways to maintain communications with your postdocs, your graduate students, but you can also think of them as going in the opposite direction of you sharing them with your departmental chair and your department mentors. That you should need to make it known, what are your career goals? Where are you headed? What are the goals for your laboratory? So people have that on their radar and they can help you or recommend you for things. Have a short-term list of goals, a long-term list, and maybe even continue to do an IDP plan every year. If you have an IDP plan for your tenure plans and for how you want your lab to progress, that means you're sitting down and thinking about it in advance. You're not reacting, but you're planning and thinking in advance, and you're sharing that with your mentors who can then tell you you're being over ambitious, you're not being ambitious enough. You have a great idea, but you should talk to these other folks somewhere else, and they can help connect you with people that can make your program grow. So your mentorship compacts and the communication you have, you really should be communicating what your commitment is to the various categories of research, teaching, clinical work, and service. Are you and the people that influence your schedule and your teaching assignments, is everyone aligned to what your career goals are and your advancement? Are you on track for mid-career evaluation, tenure, and the next promotion? So those are things that you can establish with mentorship compacts. So there are a variety of mentorship committees in the School of Medicine for inline mentorship. For Senate faculty, there's a committee chaired by Mintan. There's a Clinical X committee as well, HS Clinical, and there's a Physician Scientist Pathways course to developing a laboratory as a clinician scientist. There's also many departments, almost all departments have a subcommittee on mentorship, and of course they have individual mentors in the department and their department chair. So take advantage of the resources that are available in those departments. And then lastly, and I will share these documents with you as well later, but I strongly recommend that you have a standardized lab manual or some type of personnel guide that you share with everyone you hire in your laboratory. So this is something that's going to explain your philosophy, your rules, your vacation policy, where folks should go to get information, how they get keys, and how do they get access to email. What are your expectations about data security, about record keeping? If you don't have policies in place and then later there's an issue, you don't have any policies to point to. On the other hand, if you have clear policies about how notebooks should be kept, where the notebooks are stored, who has ownership of that notebook, which should be the laboratory PI, not the individual. Folks should understand that reporting responsibility of the PI. But if that's all laid out in a lab manual, there's much fewer chances for misunderstandings later. And then I think a thing that people don't think about until they have a problem with it is authorship guidelines and what your plans are for authorship on various manuscripts, posters, and presentations. So have a clear guide to authorship. Eileen Anderson and I share a lab authorship guide that we borrowed from Stephen Colson at Harvard University. We've adapted it to our lab. Happy to share it with you, and you can edit it and make it fit what it is that you do. So that's just a basic, quick introduction to do what you did to get you hired at UCI. Definitely have a plan as to what kind of lab do you want to have, what do you want to be known for, and what kind of culture and what kind of atmosphere do you want to set up in your lab. Be cognizant of that and share it with your mentors, share it with the people that you hire so that everyone's on as much of the same page as possible. And with that, that's the end of my formal set of slides. I do have a link to the Faculty Mentoring Academy, and I presume, Peter, you're going to speak more about this, but there is a 5-part series of mentoring faculty workshops that are being hosted in the Donald Brent Event Center, and we'll share you a link to this as well at the end of the session. But what I'm unclear on is, Peter, are you going next or is Karina going next?
Karina will go next.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Karina Cramer. I'm a professor of neurobiology and behavior in the School of Biological Sciences, and I am the Associate Dean of Academic Personnel. And regarding this the Faculty Mentoring Academy, Brian and Peter and I and several other leaders on campus, people working with faculty development and diversity, we got together just about a year and a half ago, and we decided to create a campus-wide academy to help people with mentoring. I strongly encourage you to take it. It's very interactive. It's in person, and it gives you an opportunity to bring questions when you have them. So for those of you who are very new, you may not have any mentoring issues right now, or when you first went to your initial onboarding, but things come up, and things come up for everyone. So this academy is open to all faculty at all levels. And this the the workshops include the topics that you'll see on the flyer that's part of this presentation, and some of what I'm talking about today comes from that. The Mentoring Academy is really geared toward graduate students, but I've sort of optimized this for sort of more general mentoring as well. So to begin, I want to mention that there are elements of effective mentoring, and there are many, and they're for you to discover. Since you are in the School of Medicine, there are sometimes there are people in the School of Medicine running a research group who've never been to graduate school, and you haven't seen the best examples or all of the examples. And really, this is something for you to figure out for your own lab what works best for you. And these are some guidelines that people have done research on and looked at. So for effective mentoring, it's important to be self-aware. there is actually an optimal group size, which is about 5 to 10 people, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a smaller or bigger group, research group, without tremendous success. I wrote self-awareness again. Sorry about that. One thing is to be open to feedback, and we'll get into that a little bit in a moment. I think in addition to the guidelines for your lab, the lab policies and authorship, it might be helpful to have a code of conduct in your lab. There is a code of conduct for the school. There may be a code of conduct for your department, but it is something that does unfortunately come up from time to time, and it's important for people in your group to understand that. But the most important things are bolded here, and those are trust. You need to trust your team, and they need to trust you, and they need to trust each other, and aligning expectations, which is what I'm going to focus on. Um, I can field questions if you have any during my presentation, and I encourage you to ask questions now or at the end. And I also again want to reiterate that the workshops that we hold as part of the Faculty Mentoring Academy are very interactive, and they're also in a safe space where you can bring things up if you like.
Can I ask, what do you mean by self-awareness in this context?
Well, it means understand how you are affecting the other people in your group. Understand how your there are several factors here. It could be your cultural background, your experience. Be aware that people who are working with you um, may not have had the advantages that you have had. They are aware if you're one of the best pieces of advice I got from my postdoc advisor is be the first one in and the last one to leave. They're aware of where you are or when you're there and when you're not there. They're aware of whether you play favorites or spend more time with one person than another, or these kinds of things that they're everything that you do impacts your mentees. Well, not everything, but many of the things that you do, they're aware of, and you should be aware of them as well. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Any other
Well,
questions?
Karina, I would just add there that like as an example of being self-aware, or I should say, the example of not being self-aware, I think, oh, I'm a very friendly, easygoing guy. I go by first name basis. And so clearly students would be very comfortable and happy talking to me. And that's not the case. As the age difference between the
Yeah.
PI and the student grow, they see you as somebody that is, separate. And you,
Yeah.
so you have to be aware of where your position is, and that there are barriers that, even if you think that you run a very open, uh, transparent program, that isn't always what people that are in your system actually believe.
Right. Absolutely.
Do you have any recommendations of how to increase self-awareness? I mean, when you think of
Well,
yourself, you feel
um,
like you're aware certain amount, but actually we're not really very objective about ourselves.
well, self-awareness is a broad term. I'm going to tell you something, that's a little bit off the wall, but I highly, highly recommend mindfulness meditation and do it every day. It's um, helpful for observing yourself, for recognizing, noticing what's happening with you. It's good for everything. It's good for stress. It's good for anxiety, depression, any of the things that might befall a new faculty member. Um, and Also, I think so. Some of the exercises I'm going to show you will increase your self-awareness in your mentoring relationships.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So how do we establish expectations? Your mentees and your employees will have expectations of you, and you will have expectations of them. And um, it's really important to figure out how to get those aligned so that what they think you expect of them is actually what you expect of them, and vice versa. The key to this is communication at every stage. You want to not just establish what are the expectations for your academic progress or for work or for hours, but also what are your expectations in the mentoring relationship. So you really need to uh, okay. You really need to make sure that you establish very clearly what you expect, and keep in mind that uh, every mentor-mentee relationship is unique, and every graduate student is unique, every postdoc is unique, every staff person is unique. Everybody comes in with different mentoring needs, different levels of experience, different backgrounds. Um, Even if you know something about them, like they come from a particular cultural group or they're first generation college student, or English is their second language, you still really don't know them until you establish this relationship. Each person is uh, an individual alongside their identity of any other sort, and that's really important to successful mentoring. So, just as Brian mentioned, that there are expectations for you as you go through your merit and promotions, each of you who is working with graduate students, for example, there are actual graduate program rules that and requirements that you need to be familiar with, and you and your mentees need to be familiar with them, and um, understand what the goals are and how to achieve them. So I want to put this out there. Um, the lack of clear expectations is a major, major source of stress in for graduate students, especially, but also for other trainees. And um, I think the best example I can give here is when I went through graduate school to get my PhD. My husband was in medical school getting his MD. And for him, all he had to do was memorize these stacks of books, and then he would have his MD and get a test on them, and he would have his MD. But for graduate students, you have to go in and do something that's never been done before, that in many cases, no one knows how to do, and the answer is not known, and the amount of work is not known. It's all unique. And so it's very comforting for graduate students experiencing stress about this lack of expectations to have some sort of short-term goals, long-term goals, intermediate range goals, to try to figure out what are some tangible deliverables that they can focus on to help them, and what do you expect from them. So you need to set up mentoring strategies that you both agree on, that you both think will work for this person. Okay, so I'm going to introduce a tool that I discovered. Actually, I discovered this tool when I was preparing my workshop for the Faculty Mentoring Academy last year, and it's been tremendously helpful. So that this is just the credit for the tool, and this is what it looks like. So what you do is you fill this out for each student, and you go through these questions. So you fill it out and they fill it out. In an ideal mentoring relationship, the mentor and mentee should have similar research interests. And you would say 1 if you feel that that's very true, and 6 if you feel it's not true. Um, And in an ideal mentoring relationship, both should have similar working and communication styles, would be the other end of this particular spectrum. There are questions that have to do with close supervision and guidance versus independence. Um, Knowledge of the research topic versus openness to learning about the research project and other related disciplines. So these are, you can take a look at these. They will be in the notes because I put it in here. And notice also that it says early stages, middle stages, and advanced stages. So down here you get things that have to do with presentation of papers and writing their thesis and understanding co-authorship, which actually, you might want to address that here. So the way this works is that each mentee and mentor complete it. So I'm just going to say up front, you're going to fill this out separately for each mentee because there's no one answer for each mentoring relationship. You might have a really experienced and independent graduate student coming in from maybe even with a master's or maybe coming from a lot of research experience and lots of writing, and they might want to be very independent early on. So your expectation of them should be different. So you'll fill this out and they fill it out, and then you get together and discuss it. And I should tell you that I did this in preparation for the workshop that I did last year, and I was shocked at how different my understanding was from my mentees. For example, on grant writing, I felt like I should be very involved in supervising grant writing. And my first year graduate student said, "Oh, I don't need any help with that. I already know how to write a grant." So, this is eye-opening, and it's also a really great icebreaker for you and your mentees. It was really fun. It was really fun to sit and talk with him about, well, how often should we meet and what kinds of things do you need from me? And it's very different. I have this graduate student wants a written summary of our meeting, which is always a good practice. And he also wants a to-do list, whereas other mentees could be more, you know, they know what they have to do when they get out of the meeting, and they have maybe more irons in the fire. So everyone's different. The other thing is notice that there were these different eras. Mentoring expectations change over time. Obviously, if someone is in the late stages of their project and they've already been humming along and collecting data, they are going to need less guidance than someone who's just starting on a project. But keep in mind that new circumstances come along. For example, someone might advance to candidacy, somebody might have completed a project and gotten a paper done. Then you have to kind of retool and figure out what to do next. Another thing that I think is really important, especially for graduate students and postdocs, but also for anyone where your mentoring has been really meaningful and effective, is that they may continue to rely on you as a mentor beyond their graduation or their term working with you. And I think that's fantastic. I'm a full professor and I still have a mentor who's my postdoc mentor who I can still rely on for anything that comes up. Mostly we're just friends now, but for many years I did come to him with questions and ideas, and it was great. So I do have former students who are changing jobs, and sometimes they need a letter, but sometimes they want to know, what do you think about this, and where should I go next, and it's really important for you to decide whether you want to commit to that and let them know if you do. It's a good thing. Okay, so as I've mentioned, I really feel like if you have a mentoring style, then you're not doing it right because every single mentee is different. You got to personalize it for each one of them. Um, you can use the UCI IDP. Has anyone in here used that one? Show of hands, maybe. Has anyone heard of it? Okay. All right. Okay, good. So a few people have heard of it. Basically, the graduate division has developed a very rudimentary IDP, which is an individual development plan. And I encourage you to personalize it for your area. So definitely academic course planning, when are they going to take what? Research planning is very important. Conferences, publications, career planning. Talk to your trainees about career planning. I would encourage them to do it, but also talk to them about how much time they're going to spend on it. We have a fantastic campus-wide program called GPS STEM, which can help with career development, particularly it's for all people getting a PhD or having a PhD in biomedical and STEM research. So some of them are going to go into academia, some of them might do something else. There are lots of activities for careers outside academia. Planning for funding, health and wellness planning. I've actually had in my IDP for one of my students take a vacation this year, and I couldn't get her to do it until sort of late in the game. But they need it, and they need to figure out how they're going to, keep themselves healthy and well so that they can complete their work. Some mentees may be interested in leadership. How can you help develop their leadership and give them opportunities to take lead roles in their training? Progress towards dissertation. Some of you may be training residents or medical students. In that case, it's really important to figure out how to balance clinical versus research training, all kinds of things. You can make it personal the way you want it. Okay. And then the mentoring compacts kind of reflect this. The IDP is a plan, a development plan, but the mentoring compact really is more of an agreement about how the mentoring itself should proceed. You're going to have discussions about communication. How often will you meet? Employment and graduate training, as I mentioned, with clinical responsibilities. It can also have to do with TAing, et cetera. Contract and union issues. We think that the students suffered quite a bit. I know we suffered quite a bit during the strike, but the students did too. And part of it is some of them just don't know how we feel. We got a strong message not to discuss it with them, but you might just tell them, I support you, and I'm not allowed to discuss certain topics, but just know that I support you, and I really want to do everything that I can to help you do well. Little things like that can go a long way. And then, things like expectations for how often they will be in and will they be working in person. Opportunities for feedback goes back to something we talked about before. Giving feedback to them and getting feedback from them. It's helpful every now and then to say, hey, how's the mentoring going? Are we doing a good job with the mentoring? I should also say here, asking questions is the best way to communicate with your students. Ask them questions, ask how they're doing. If they're struggling with something, see if you can find a way to question them, and possibly they might find answers on their own, which is always the most empowering. Things like the student's role in the project, what are they supposed to be doing? This is especially important early on when people are developing their independent projects. Group meetings, if you have them, which I highly recommend, and then papers and publication. So that's all that I've prepared. I know it's a lot, but if you have any questions about establishing and aligning expectations, I'm happy to discuss. I do also want to plug before I give Peter the stage. I do want to plug NIH Boot Camp. And how many people in here have done it? Great. Okay. Yeah, I know Kyoko and Peter have um, and Jeff Abbott, you've worked with that, right? Yeah, so several of us have done coaching, but one thing that I really appreciated is that the trainees, the basically early career faculty who get together and do the boot camp, one of the groups that I had continues to work together, and I can't stress enough the value of peer mentoring for each other, um, for your NIH boot camp group, etc., your trainees. It's a very valuable way to go. Okay, I will stop there and give Peter the floor, the screen.
Thanks a lot, Karina. There might be a little bit overlap between what you and I are doing, but first of all, I want to thank Brian and Amisha for putting on this series. I think it's a series that we all wish we'd had when we were young faculty members, and also like to thank Jeff in the Dean's office for supporting this. So I was asked to talk about mentoring graduate students and postdoctoral fellows. Let me just start by saying, right now I'm the program director for 3 training programs that train graduate students, postdocs, and clinical fellows. But I think, as Karina alluded to, that doesn't mean that I by any means know all the answers. And sometimes, particularly in the present environment, the kind of questions are changing as well. So we're all kind of learning here. I didn't know whether people on the call wanted to know how you find graduate students in UCI and how you can attract postdocs to your lab. Brian, is that something that I should just...
Yeah, I think that's a great thing, because also this is going to be watched by thousands of other faculty later.
Millions.
Yeah, possibly millions.
So the graduate students at UCI come through a number of different mechanisms. The 2 main so-called graduate gateway programs are CMB, the Cellular and Molecular Biosciences program, which is a joint program administered between the School of Medicine and the School of Biological Sciences, and the Interdepartmental Neuroscience program, which is also run between really the 2 main neuroscience departments on the campus, neurobiology, behavior, and anatomy and neurobiology, and then lots of other affiliated faculty who work on neuroscience throughout the other departments. And then there's a 3rd, smaller program that might be of interest to some of you, and that's the Mathematical and Computational Systems Biology program, which kind of grew out of the Systems Biology group at UCI, and has a lot of young people joining who come from mathematics and physics and want to study biology. So they have a different skill set than the graduates in the other programs, and certainly worth considering. And then it's worth also pointing out that any faculty member that has a association with the basic science department can do what's called a direct admit into their lab. And that is, for example, when you might have had a tech working in your lab, and then you realize, man, that person's really good. Rather than them applying and maybe not getting into graduate school, or applying and getting snapped up by someone else, you can directly admit them into your lab. And that is, I've seen that happen more and more recently, and can work out really well.
Hey, Peter,
Yeah.
are there advantages or disadvantages to direct admit students?
For the direct admit students, they sometimes kind of don't get incorporated with the cohort of CMB and IMP students, so they don't necessarily feel part of that group. They don't necessarily have to take the coursework, which I sometimes think is a mistake, because that coursework can sometimes form the basis of some really good understanding of science. For the PI, it means that person gets to start in your lab right away. For the PI, that means they have to pay right away. Whereas coming through the Gateway program, we like these students to do 2 or 3 rotations. And so the student might join your lab for 1 rotation and go away for another 2. And even though you don't have to pay, you don't have them in your lab. So, and you might also lose them that way. So there are pros and cons of both things. And one of the other things I was going to say later is that the people to talk to about this, I would say, are the graduate advisors in each of the departments. And I believe Kyoko, who's on the line here, is the graduate advisor in biological chemistry. And so they know an awful lot about how this works. So I would say for any new faculty member joining, go and talk to the graduate advisor in your department and get the ins and outs of all of that. I think that's right, isn't it, Brian and Jeff, that if you're in a clinical appointment, you have to go through a basic science department to get a graduate student, or they can clinical faculty get direct admits straight into their lab without that?
No, my understanding is you have to get a secondary appointment in a basic science department.
Yeah.
And so, and that can be advantageous in other ways as well, right? It introduces the basic science folks to clinical collaborators and vice versa. So it's encouraged that way as well.
Yeah. I just wanted to be certain I didn't mislead that. And again, there are others on this call that can address the second question. Those of you that are coming in as new assistant professors, presumably you were hired probably because of some big breaking story that came out in Nature Cell of Science. And I would encourage you to ride the wave of that success, that it's a big deal, it's out there now, advertise widely, and that's the time at which postdocs will come to your lab when you've had a big new finding come out. And the way I normally have done it is I make up a little poster in PowerPoint and I send it to anyone I know in science and say, would you mind posting this poster and bringing it to the attention of any graduate students that are thinking of coming to do a postdoc? And I think there are other ways to do it as well, through Twitter and through different societies, but advertise widely and really ride the wave of your success. Some advice I was given about hiring anyone is don't hire someone because you need a pair of hands. You would be shocked at how one person can completely poison a lab. And so I would really be careful when you interview and don't take someone who you feel, I'm not entirely sure about that person. And I would trust your gut feelings, young Padawans. I know that sounds a bit touchy-feely, but throughout my career, I really trusted my gut instincts, and I didn't on one occasion, and it cost me. So I would do that. And to the point that Karina made, each person is different. And so you have to mold your mentoring style to the person. And I'll speak a little bit more about that, but it's so true. And I don't think it's actually that difficult. So one of the things we've been talking about in the Mentoring Academy recently is the concept of cultural humility. And not to go into that in too much detail, but it kind of recognizes the fact that, for example, even though Jeff and I are both white males and we grew up in Britain, it doesn't mean we have the same values or agree with each other or do things exactly the same way. And so the concept of cultural humility is really understanding that the people you work with don't necessarily share the kind of work ethic you have, the goals that you have, and it's better going into a relationship to understand that. And motivational interviewing is a style where you try and understand where that person is coming from, where that graduate student is coming from, where the postdoc is coming from, so that you understand what they want to get out of being in your lab. And again, I think this comes back to Karina's point about communication skills and understanding each other. If you understand that your graduate student doesn't want to go into academia, but they're quite fine with going into biotech and they want to finish fairly, quickly in graduate school, that's not necessarily a bad thing. for promotion and tenure committees to say that you graduated a student in 5 years, but they didn't stay there and get the Cell or Science or Nature paper out, maybe that's a good thing. And for you to help them do that is also a good thing. And then the final thing I want to mention that we started doing on one of my training grants a while ago is a thing called Strength Finders, which is a small book and a short online test. And the concept is that we spend a lot of our times focusing on what we're not good at and not on what the things we are good at. And when we've done that, it's really helped the faculty and their mentees understand each other. One faculty member said, "Oh, now I know what Will is good at. I will use him in the lab to promote those things like, sending round emails to collaborators. He loves to communicate. He loves to be organized." And the students say to us, "Oh, I had no idea that my PI liked to do things this way." So I think that can be very useful. But both of those things, I feel, come to a concept of it's not all about you. In a mentoring relationship, yes, when you're starting off a lab, I feel like part of the push is to get papers out, to get grants, and get promotion. But the students and postdocs in your lab have different goals, and sometimes those don't align. But the more you can understand where they are coming from and move them towards those goals, the better it is, I think, for everyone. And I certainly am at the stage of my career where I've had my share of Science, Cell, and Nature papers, but seeing where my mentees have gone and what they've accomplished is so rewarding to me. It's unbelievable. So this was a piece of advice that my first graduate student gave to me. You're not here to be their friend. You're there to be the mentor. And those are two very different things. You certainly can take the lab to the beach and have fun, but you're not there to be the best friend. And sometimes, particularly when you're starting a lab and you're younger, it's difficult to say to someone, you need to get in on time and work harder because you don't want to upset them and you feel like, oh, we have a good relationship. But your role is as a mentor, and that's a little bit different from being a friend. And then finally, a thing I think that is also difficult when you're starting off is you're the boss. And sometimes you need to step up and do that and lay down the law. And I don't mean that in a really kind of dictatorial way, but I've known students that have come to me as, in confidence and said, my PI won't let me do these experiments I've thought of. And my answer is always the same. Well, your PI is the head of the lab. It's his intellectual ideas that have driven the lab. He's got the money to do it. Why do you think you should be able to go off and do whatever you want? And I think there's certain instances like that without dampening people's creativity where you have to kind of step up and say, okay, I'm the boss. This is the way things work. Might be difficult, but, I think that's something you have to think about. So for some while, I was in a position where I got to know all the incoming students. I was director of the CMB program. I was also associate dean for graduate studies in the School of Medicine. And you get to see a lot of the problems. And one of the things I don't think the students want to know about is your personal problems. They have their own problems, and you don't need to tell them that your wife is, complaining that you'll get home late and the kids are crying and, you've got a long drive home and, what is that? How does that help them? It doesn't really. So I wouldn't get into, and this I think comes to the issue of, you're not their friends. The other thing I would say to you is, and the people at NIH tell us this, don't share all your work problems with them. Yes, we serve on study sections. Yes, we review grants. Yes, we review papers. Yes, we have to go and give talks. But this is the life we signed up for. And to complain about it to the students, not only do they think, oh my God, why did I enter this profession? My PI is, miserable. But the other thing is, there's a different way to spin those things. I get to sit on study sections and learn the latest science before anyone in the world even knows about it. I got to review a paper about an exciting new breakthrough, and it has loads of technologies that I think will be great. I think one of the things the NIH people tell us is sometimes faculty complain too much, and it has a trickle-down effect on the students and postdocs. So I would, even though you may be feeling down, the students and the graduate students aren't necessarily the people to share that with. And the other thing I would encourage you to do is celebrate success. Particularly, share success with the students and the postdocs over what they achieved. Did they get asked to give a poster somewhere? Did they get through their advancement exam? Did they give a nice talk at the RIP session in your department? And there are, sometimes lows in science, but you've got to celebrate the successes, in my opinion. And do that for the work that's going on in the lab and build a culture of, we celebrate success. We're a kind of fun, happy group, even if behind the scenes there are other things going on. And I'll deal with those in a minute. Karina touched on this, but I think that particularly the first 5 or 6 years of being a faculty member are probably the most difficult in our profession. You go from being a postdoc where you work alone at a lab bench, maybe with a technician or a graduate student, and you're doing lab research, and then all of a sudden there's a change of career where you're managing people, probably weren't trained for that. You're managing budgets, probably weren't trained for that. You're having to go out and give a lot more talks. You're having to sit on study sections, weren't trained for all of that. And it's a real kind of sink or swim experience in some ways, although it's changed, I would say, as Brian alluded to before. But know that there's support out there. If you're having problems, go to your mentoring committee or go to your mentors. And again, as Karina alluded to, we as faculty also, in many ways, not only need our own mentors, we have them in different places. And I will still call up my postdoc mentor and talk to him. I still call up other, senior colleagues around the world that I'm friends with and discuss things with them, or colleagues on campus. And they aren't necessarily your official mentoring committee, but those are the people you can go to, for help. And the other thing that I think is worth thinking, if a colleague came to you and said, "Oh my God, I've got this problem student. I don't know what to do about it," you would be very supportive of them. Why aren't you supportive of yourself? And so I think one of the other things we all need to learn as colleagues is let's give ourselves a bit of a break. If you're having a problem, don't beat yourself up about it. Take a bit of time off for a bit of a break. Maybe, don't work all day Saturday or something, and go to the beach and just chill, or go to a yoga class and take care of yourself. There's that great saying, put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. So I think that, it's a bit touchy-feely in science to think about, wellness and breathing right and all that. But I think it's really important. And there are great resources through the Susan Samuel Integrative Health Institute that have helped us in training grants with doing wellness exercises as faculty and students. So I'd really encourage you to look out for those. And then the other thing I would say is each basic science department has a graduate advisor. I think Kyoko's on the call, and she's the one in my home department, biological chemistry. These are people that have, over the years, dealt with many, many graduate students. So if you're having a problem with a graduate student, and I would say possibly a postdoc, go and talk to those people. They've probably seen most of it all before, and they can make suggestions too. And I think that's really useful. And then finally, if your graduate students in particular are having problems, graduate division has this great group of psychiatrists and health professionals that help the graduate students deal with their own stress. So one of the things I would encourage you all to do is, if you're having a problem with a graduate student that's struggling, encourage them to go to that group. And Fong Long in graduate division, he's a member of the group that established the Mentoring Academy, but he's done fantastic things for many graduate students. And I'd really encourage if you're having a problem with a student or a postdoc, to ask them to reach out to him. In many ways, it's a shame that the faculty don't have someone like that, but that's why I'm encouraging you to think about going to your other mentors and to think about practicing wellness. And then finally, I'd say have fun. You got into this because you love doing the science, and try and enjoy it. I know the first 5 or 6 years can be really stressful because there's a tenure clock running and you're trying to get papers out. But I think if you try and look after yourself and you get excited by the science, that will pass down to your graduate students and postdocs, and that will help you establish a really good working relationship with them, and they will share in the excitement of making discoveries and working with you. If you're kind of miserable all the time and depressed, that's going to have an impact in a different way. So I'd really encourage you to try and remember why you're here, why you're excited about doing science, and realize there's help for you, at every step along the way. And again, I want to congratulate Brian and Amisha on this series because I think it's so important.
Well, thank you, Peter. We're basically out of time, but we're going to post this and people can review it. But are there any questions from the folks that are still in the audience that Peter or Karina or I could cover while you're here? All right,
Sorry, I like to try the Karina's questionnaire things. Is it possible to get that, like, not in a slide format, but document?
You're muted, Karina.
Yeah, I can send it to you. It's really just the one page. So,
Sounds good. Thank you.
okay. And you
I'm
can
sure-
modify it.
Yeah, I'm sure other people are interested too.
Okay.
There's a question on the chat from Theo. My understanding is that you can only have graduate students if you're in a degree providing department. Are there any options for faculty that are not in a degree providing department? I think, Jeff, you're probably the best person to answer that.
Yeah, we covered that one. Remember, Peter, they
Yeah.
need to go and get a secondary appointment, and they can come and ask advice to me or Brian or Namisha about which basic science department might be most appropriate for what they do, so we can help them kind of find the right one.
And as Jeff said earlier, Theo, there are great advantages to doing that for both sides. You bring an awful lot of expertise from the clinical part, but they can bring technologies and experience to your lab and your science that can end up with fantastic collaborations.
Brian, would you be willing to share the protocol that you mentioned and the guidelines for authorship, and also how to conduct your research and document, etc., if you have such?
So I have sample documents for all of those, and I will have Sophia send them to everybody who's part of this.
Thank you.